How's everyone doing this evening? Great. Doing well? Great. Well, how many of you were here last night? Can I see a show of hands? Great. How many of you, this is your first night here? Wonderful. We are so glad that you're here. You may be wondering, why am I going to talk about health? What does health have to do with prophecy, with the current events, right, that are transpiring in our country? But did you realize health has a lot to do with all these things? If we just look at it from a Bible perspective, we're told in 3 John 2, "Beloved, I wish above all things that thou would prosper and be in" what? Be in health, even as thy soul prospers, right? And what did Jesus do when he was walking around this earth? What was his purpose? It was to bring people a knowledge of the gospel, right? But what was he doing physically speaking? In Matthew 9:35 it says, "And Jesus went about all the cities and villages doing" what? Teaching, preaching, and healing. And he wasn't just healing the minor diseases or the minor aches and pains. He was healing all manner of diseases and all manner of sicknesses among the people. And I'll submit to you, we have a lot of these diseases and sicknesses in our society today. And you know what? Every time I look at the news, there's a new virus, there's a new type of disease, right? These things are exponentially growing. And so we're going to be looking at health. And in particular, we're going to be looking at a very practical aspect of health tonight that I hope tonight you implement, okay? It's something that you can do tonight, believe it or not. And that has to do with rest. Rest for the land. Do you believe that our nation is in need of rest? Do you believe we're possibly in need of rest? I'll submit to you, we're probably more in need of rest than we realize. The estimated amount of people with troubled sleep in America is 60 million people. 60 million people with troubled sleep. You don't have to raise your hand, but would you include yourself in that number? Many of us have had a troubled night's sleep. You know what makes us so bad in terms of our health is that 90% of healing, and for children, 90% of growing takes place there while we sleep. So it's very important, it's very vital. It sounds like this is an important time of the day, right? If 90% of our healing takes place during this time, I'll submit to you, it's a very important part of our day. Where can we go in the Bible to learn a little bit about sleep? Well, we can learn about the very first rest that was ever recorded in the Bible from Genesis 2, 1 through 2. And it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them, and on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done." And he did what? Rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. Now, why did he rest? Was he tired? No, because it says in Isaiah 40:28, "Have you not known, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable," right? So God doesn't get tired. Why did he rest? I'll submit to you, it wasn't for his sake necessarily, it was for our sake, because you know what? We need to understand from God's example. We need to put more emphasis on that rest, on that aspect of rest for our own benefit. Tell you a little bit about sleep so we can try to enjoy better sleep. First of all, sleep is not just something that is a passive activity, meaning we don't do anything when we sleep. Your body is in some ways more active during sleep than it was than during your awake stages of the day. So we're going to look at the stages of sleep and try to figure out what goes on during rest, during sleep. So first of all, when we go into sleep, we go into a light sleep. During this stage, also known as stage 1 sleep, we actually have a very, it's kind of like an alert stage of sleep. Anyone ever been driving down the road and it's getting kind of late and your eyes are getting kind of heavy, and then all of a sudden you startle? You just fell asleep. And thankfully, you just jumped right out of it, too. So you went into stage 1 sleep. Sounds dangerous, doesn't it? Many motor vehicle accidents are caused by people falling asleep at the wheel. So if that happens, what do we need to do? We need to pull over and go to sleep. At least get a little bit of rest that will help us not to have that happen again. Okay, so stage 1, we're easily awakened, just very light sleep. What happens when we get deeper sleep? Well, that's stage 2. Our eye movements cease, and generally speaking, we kind of have a decrease in brain activity. Now, keep this in mind. You never have a flat line in terms of your brain activity. If you do, yeah, that's basically one of the diagnostic criteria for determining death, brain death, right? Nothing's going on in the brain. So it doesn't stop, but as we get deeper into sleep, our brain does kind of slow down in its processing. Stage 3 sleep is when we get our deep sleep. This is when we have something called delta waves beginning to appear. We'll show you what these look like in just a minute. And then stage 4, this is the deepest sleep, and this is where we have almost like a coma every night. Does that sound good or bad? It's a good thing. It really is. Your brain needs that time to heal. It is absolutely vital if you want to heal. And if you want to even recover from diseases such as MS, such as rheumatoid arthritis, all these things, we'll talk about how sleep, especially this real deep sleep, affects those diseases. But let's go to the last stage of sleep first. Stage 4, this is our REM sleep. REM sleep is known as the rapid eye movement sleep. Have you ever looked at someone while they're sleeping and you see their eyelids kind of fluttering? Ever seen that? Well, you may not have ever seen it, but what happens is your eyes move back and forth very quickly. And during this stage, it's almost like your brain is awake, but you're storing and processing information. Okay? So this is what it looks like during a good night's sleep. We're awake, and then all of a sudden we drop down into our first stage of sleep. You know, sometimes you'll actually have a little dream, a snippet of a dream, right when you're going to sleep. Okay? When you lay down your head on your pillow tonight, see if you can catch it. It's only a few seconds. I actually woke myself up the other night because I caught this little dream. But it was quite interesting. So you kind of plummet down into these stages right over here into the deep sleep. Why is that? Because your brain needs to rest. It's so important for the body. You go into that deep sleep, and then you'll come out of it a little bit, process some things in the REM sleep. These are where you have your dreams. You go back into the deep sleep, go out, back in, and then out again. And then the rest of the night, you're basically providing a little bit of rest for the brain, but mostly you're storing and processing information. Okay? Now it's interesting because there's something that happens over here during these episodes of slow wave sleep that is very important, as I said, for health. You have 2 chemicals that are secreted in the body during this time in large amounts. One is called growth hormone. Anyone heard of that before? Growth hormone, what do you think it does? It helps you grow, right? Well, especially for the children who can have that ability still. But for adults, it helps us to recover from illnesses. Those people who had low amounts of growth hormone or growth hormone deficiencies in studies have had, quote, a relative increase in fat mass and relative decrease in muscle mass, and in many instances decreased energy and poorer quality of life. Does that sound like something that we should try to attain to? We should get that rest, shouldn't we? We need that rest because we need that growth hormone. And it's interesting, most of that growth hormone is secreted right here in the slow wave sleep. There's another chemical that's produced during this time. It's called prolactin. Prolactin, you might associate that with a mother who is breastfeeding, right? They have high levels of prolactin. But all of us secrete a certain amount of prolactin during this time. You know what prolactin does? It's amazing in its potential. Studies have found it actually is able to regenerate nerves, brain cells, even neurons. Neuroregenesis takes place as a result of this chemical being secreted in the body. How many of you would like to have your brain regenerating? Well, that sounds nice, doesn't it? I think we all should try to attain to that. All right, and there's another thing that is secreted over here I failed to mention. It's called melatonin. We'll talk about melatonin in just a moment. But first of all, I want to address a topic here. How can we get into this slow wave sleep and stay into it for a longer period of time? You know, some people with certain disease processes, such as MS, they do not have this sleep during the night. They just don't have it. They've done sleep studies. They found they don't get this sleep. So what's happening? They're not healing. That's why they're getting worse and worse and worse. Okay? Certain people with mental illnesses, if they don't get this sleep, the brain is going to continue to be diseased. So what can we do to help ourselves get this better sleep? Well, let's look at some supernatural remedies. Here's a remedy here called valerian. Anyone ever heard of this before? Valerian is a common herb, and studies have shown that if you really want to have this help you out, you have to take it on a consistent basis. It doesn't take a lot. Maybe valerian tea every night would be a nice habit for a lot of us to get into. But what happens is it has to be regular. It has to be taken on a regular basis. But according to the studies, according to a research study that looked at a placebo versus valerian every night, found that valerian increased the amount or decreased the amount of time that it took to actually get into the slow wave sleep. So all of a sudden you're jumping into that healthy sleep with something like valerian, according to this study. And then also it found that it increased the amount of slow wave sleep in general, in terms of the amount of slow wave sleep you would have during the night, and seemed to do that on a regular basis. So what does that do in the long run? Well, it increases growth hormone in the long run, increases prolactin in the long run. What does that do? It helps us heal. It helps our brains to regenerate. So something like valerian could be a little helpful herb, right? But you know, there are other things that are very essential in terms of getting a good night's sleep. This is one of the most, I would say, least appreciated but most beneficial things that we could do, just getting that good night's sleep. So let's look at 7 steps to a good night's rest. First of all, it's vital, unless we're working shift work and it's impossible, it's vital that we wake up with the sun. And what do I mean by that? You can wake up, of course, before dawn, but when you see the sunlight, when it starts to get light outside, go outside. Get some fresh air and get some sunlight. You know what happens when sunlight comes and it affects our retina? It goes into the brain, the signal is sent into the brain that there's sunlight there. We actually produce something called serotonin. Serotonin is kind of the antidepressive hormone, right? It's the hormone that helps us to become more alert and more oriented to what we're doing during the day. So that is a very, very important first step there to a good night's sleep. Secondly, you need a balanced diet rich in plant-based complex carbohydrates and tryptophan, which is an amino acid. It's a building block of a protein. These are the very best things I could find right here that in terms of complex carbohydrates and high levels of tryptophan and lower levels of other amino acids, which is important to have a ratio of high tryptophan to low other amino acids. So, spirulina, watercress, sesame seeds, soy milk, tofu, soybeans, horseradish leaves, and pumpkin leaves. Now, you might think pumpkin leaves, who's going to eat those, right? Well, there you go. They're probably very, very easy to obtain during pumpkin season. Just go out and harvest the pumpkin leaves and leave the pumpkins. So it's very, very important for us to have these. Even whole grains are going to be good sources of tryptophan and complex carbohydrates. What do I mean by whole grains? Whole wheat, whole corn, corn and ginger actually even have their own melatonin, which is kind of interesting. Okay, next step, eat some bananas. Why? Ever seen on the banana sticker it says, "Go bananas at night"? This is the reason why, because they didn't just make that up. Because bananas are high in B6, vitamin B6. Also, sesame seeds are high in B6. Whole grains are high in B6. But when we have B6 at night, well, don't have it at night, but we have it during the day, and we have that B6 there in our brain at night, you know what happens to that serotonin? The alertness hormone. How many of you want to be alert during the night? Anyone? Okay, I didn't think so, unless you're working during the night. Well, this is really what we want to have happen. And we're going to jump ahead here to step 7. When we have B6 and we have serotonin and we have darkness, you know what that equals, that formula? It equals something we call melatonin. Melatonin is a wonderful hormone and neurotransmitter in the brain which helps to fight cancer. It boosts the immune system. And in general, it's a wonderful preventative hormone. It helps prevent cancer and mutations in the cells and all sorts of things. Just wonderful chemical to have. So what do we need? What's the formula? We need sunlight in the morning, right, for that serotonin. What else? We need some bananas or some whole grains, right, with that B6 during the day. And we need total darkness when we go to sleep so that we can produce large amounts of this serotonin. And we produce most of that during the first few hours of sleep. So very, very important there. Okay, let's jump back here. There are a few more steps. Find time during the day for moderate physical exercise. In the Bible it says, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much. Okay? So an impoverished laboring man or abundantly wealthy laboring man, if they're laboring, they're going to have good rest. Why is that? Because studies have found that when you exercise, when you use your muscles, you produce something, a byproduct of metabolism called adenosine. Adenosine actually goes up into the brain and says to the brain, hey, you're tired, it's time to go to sleep. So the more we work, the more tired we get, right? Kind of makes sense, right? So finding time during the day for moderate physical exercise is an important step. Okay, step 4, leave your worries behind. In the Bible it says, do not let the sun go down on your anger in Ephesians 4:26. And studies have found that increased levels of emotional stress are a definite sign or predictor of poor quality sleep. So this is a very, very important aspect, leaving those worries behind. Step 5, avoid sleep-depriving substances. Now, you might not have realized this, but some of these substances that we might consume on a day-to-day basis will be robbing us of a good night's sleep. We'll talk about a few of these. Here's a diagram showing you those waves of sleep. Here's awake, waves of sleep. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, Stage 4, and the REM sleep. Remember, the REM sleep is while we're dreaming. Stage 4 is over here, the slow wave sleep. So what chemicals interfere with sleep? It's interesting. Studies have found that alcohol actually robs the body of deep sleep and REM sleep. So what do you think happens to the chronic alcoholic? It's very well documented. Diffuse cerebellar atrophy. That means your brain just disintegrates. Why is that? Because it's not healing over here, and over here it's not storing, so it could be poor memory issues too, which we really should consider whether a glass of wine is really going to help us get to sleep. It may relax us a little bit, but it could be breaking down our sleep and breaking down our health. Okay, here's another one. Caffeine actually has been found to interfere with sleep because what happens is it stimulates the brain and it will prevent you from getting a lot of this slow wave sleep. Okay, so we knew caffeine would keep us awake, right? But even a cup of coffee in the morning, 100 milligrams of coffee in the morning has been found to interfere with slow wave sleep to some extent at night. So what's a better way to be alert in the morning? Wake up with the sun, right? Go out in the sun, get that serotonin, that alertness hormone. Okay? All right, here's another one. Tobacco actually will block the body's ability to have a long night's sleep because you know what happens? And I'm an ex-smoker myself. I can remember being woken up many times during the night. 2 hours into the sleep, your body starts to go through something called nicotine withdrawal. So what do you think happens? You wake up, right? You wake up, and it just disrupts the sleep in that way. Here's another one. Antidepressants have been found to decrease levels of REM sleep as well because they increase levels of serotonin. They make you alert even at night. And here's the last one I have to mention. Eating a very large meal, especially a very large high-fat meal, has been found to decrease the amount of REM sleep and increase the amount of times you actually wake up during the night, which kind of resets the sleep cycle. All that being said, there's a lot of things to consider, right? But step 6 is one that's kind of easy, in theory, right? Have an established early bedtime. It's so important for us to get on a cycle of going to sleep. Why is that? Because these hormones, these nighttime hormones, become cyclical. They get on a cycle. And so they're secreted. And sometimes, let's say for growth hormone, if we don't get to bed at the same time every night, we can miss out completely on that big dose of growth hormone right in the front of the sleep. So it's very, very important. Okay, can we have too much sleep? Do you think it's possible? There's a study that was done of over 70,000 American nurses, and it found these following things. Those individuals in the study that got less than 5 hours of sleep at night had a 39% increased risk of heart disease. That sounds pretty bad, but take a look at this. Those sleeping over 9 hours a night increased the risk of heart disease by 37%. So there's an issue there of moderation with sleep. You may think, well, if sleep is good, I'm going to sleep all day, right? But it really is not the most beneficial every night or every day to sleep for longer than, I would say, up to 8 hours. Really, ideally, 7 to 8 hours is the ideal if we can get that much for an adult. Children, of course, need more sleep than we do. Okay, here's another study. Losing more than 3 hours of sleep a night can decrease your immune function by up to 50%. So what does that do? That predisposes us to things like cancer and infections. So sleep is so vitally important for these things. Here's an interesting one. Diabetes. You may think, well, what does sleep have to do with diabetes? It has a profound impact on diabetes risk. Study that looked at people that slept 6 or fewer hours a night showed that they had a 95% increased risk for developing type 2 diabetes. That's scary, isn't it? Many times I've gotten less than 6 hours a night. But if we make that a consistent thing, we're in trouble because our risk will go higher and higher. Those that slept over 8 hours a night in this study, now this is where it gets kind of interesting. If you thought sleeping too little was bad, those that got over 8 hours a night of sleep increased their risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 200%. 200%. All right, so what do we need to do? We need to get a good amount of sleep, but obviously not too much. Now, here's a little picture showing nighttime awakenings. If you get awoken a lot during the night, this is probably what your sleep pattern is going to look like down here. How many times has this person gotten into slow wave sleep, the stage 4? Not any time at all during the night. They're suffering. Not only are they suffering with sleep, but they're suffering physically speaking. Their health is suffering because of this. So we need to get back from this over to here. And I'll submit to you, as a nation, we're in trouble because we have so many people that have troubled sleep. It's unbelievable. There's not only does this troubled sleep affect us physically, we found that inadequate sleep increases depression risk, and even oversleeping, there again, increases risk of mental illness. Now, how many of you consider yourself one of God's children? Okay, every hand should go up. You know why? Because God loves you and He wants to do good for you, and He wants to raise you up as a child to serve Him. Here's a study that looked at sleep and children. And it found that children going to bed after 9 p.m. were the most at risk for developing diabetes, their type 1 diabetes, and temperament issues. There was a study that was kind of interesting that found that you've gotten those progress reports, right, from your children at school. And there's this little box that says, plays well with others, draws within the lines, or I don't know, just these social things, right? To find out how your child is doing emotionally and socially. All right, now, if your child is having trouble sleep, the predictors of them having troubled social relationships and troubled emotions are sky high. It's amazing how much it increases these risks. So here's a little thing you can say to yourself to remember what time to get your child in bed. All right, everyone ready for it? In bed before 9, the less they will whine. In bed before 9, the less they will whine. Now, I'll submit to you, that doesn't just hold true for these children over here. If we would get more rest, more higher quality rest, I submit to you, we'd have an easier time being members of God's family and being kind to each other and being persevering and being loving to each other. Amen? And so I'll submit to you, God wants to give us this rest just as much as He wants to heal this land. In the Bible, in Psalms 4:5, it says, I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord only, makest me dwell in safety. God wants to give us that rest, and He wants to give us that peace. And it's ours for the taking tonight. Okay, this time I want to invite up my good friend and colleague, Don Frost, and he's going to expound upon some more topics dealing with prophecy. How many of you have been excited about what you've been hearing so far? All right, well, I'll submit to you, I've gotten a few glimpses of what Don's going to be talking about. It's going to be a blessing. I'm going to be all ears tonight.